They're not vampires, though they're highly sensitive to blood. They're not krakens, but they lurk below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. And they're not just a prop for B-list Hollywood movies. They're sharks, and they're as real as you and I. Welcome to Fierce's Shark Marathon, a collection of some of the most gruesome stories involving the most feared fish on our planet. After hearing these stories, you might want to think twice before swimming in the ocean. Living in paradise quickly turns to hell when a mother of three is torn to shreds just yards from her beachfront property on the Hawaiian island of Maui. Marty Morrell had swum every morning of her life since she was a little girl. Now, living on the idyllic island with her family, she continued that tradition until fate finally caught up with her. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. Martha Morrell, known as Marty, grew up in Des Moines. She attended Washington State University, where she met her husband, Dave Morrell. They decided to move to Hawaii in 1972. They settled there and started a family. Dave got a job as the manager of the Pioneer Sugar Mill on Maui. In 1988, they moved to a beautiful beachfront property at Hekili Point, Olowalu. It was like a dream come true. This place had something special, a double reef system that created a calm and private lagoon. Every morning, Marty would walk from her house to the beach and go for a swim in the crystal clear water. She loved swimming since she was a young girl, and now she had the ocean right at her doorstep. It was perfect. Their children were growing up, and by 1991, their son Mark was studying at Columbia University. Their other two children, Malaya and Keone, were going to Lahaina Luna High School on Maui. Marty loved swimming so much that she became a board member at the Oahu's Manoa Aquatics Club, which was a swimming club for kids. She also spent time volunteering and raising money for the United Way, a charity that helped the people of Oahu in Hawaii. Marty was a kind and gentle person who was active in her church. She even invited the Waiоla Church Choir to come sing Christmas carols in her neighborhood and offered to feed them afterward. Unfortunately, her generous offer never came to be. In November 1991, tension hung heavy in the Hawaiian morning air. Marty's friend Louise Soriso, a Vancouver doctor, was visiting the Morrell family. Little did they know, their early morning swim on November 26, 1991 would be far from routine. The clock hadn't quite struck 9 when they ventured into the sea, their lives unknowingly poised on a precipice. They swam out, leaving the shore behind, venturing about 100 yards beyond the protective reef. However, in a heartbeat, tranquility surrendered to terror. Only 10 minutes into their swim, Louise's trained eye caught a glimpse of something ominous. A dorsal fin breaching the surface, tantalizingly close. At first, she mistook it for a playful dolphin, a flash of gray amidst the cerulean expanse. Her curiosity led her to dip her head beneath the waves, and as her vision adjusted, a chilling truth unfurled. It was not a dolphin. What materialized before her was the stuff of nightmares, a creature from the abyssal depths of fear itself. It was a tiger shark, a beast notorious in the annals of oceanic dread. Louise felt her blood run cold as the enormity of the situation seized her. This was no ordinary shark. It was a titan among predators, and it was closing in. In an instant, the idyllic morning shattered into a nightmare. Without warning, the Leviathan lunged, jaws agape, seizing Marty's torso in a vice-like grip. In a macabre ballet, it thrashed its head from side to side, locked onto its quarry with an unbreakable grip. Louise grabbed a piece of driftwood that bobbed nearby, swung it like a makeshift weapon, attempting to repel the attacker. But the shark remained undeterred, its predatory focus unbroken. Marty's anguished cries filled the air as she fought for her life, struggling to wrestle herself from the jaws of the relentless predator. She fought to keep her head above water, but the shark's relentless pull dragged her into the abyss. The chaos unfolding in the water didn't go unnoticed. At Marty's house, the maid witnessed the unfolding tragedy and dialed emergency services with trembling hands. With the brutal assault showing no signs of relenting, Louise faced a dire choice. She had to swim for shore and summon help, As she reached the shallows, panic coursing through her veins, she screamed for assistance, her voice a desperate plea echoing through the coastal stillness. A repairman laboring at Marty's residence heard the frantic cries and bolted outside. He snatched a paddleboard and plunged into the churning sea, propelling himself toward Marty's dire situation. In the tumultuous water, a nightmarish scene played out. The dark gray fins and sinuous form of the shark surged above the surface as it relentlessly rolled and tore into Marty. The repairman's arrival on the scene unveiled a horrifying revelation. More sharks had joined the gruesome feast. It had turned into a frenzied bloodbath, an insurmountable onslaught. Terrified for his own life atop the precarious paddleboard, he made a harrowing decision. He turned and paddled frantically back to the safety of the shore, leaving Marty to her grim fate. Emergency services, along with personnel from the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the Lahaina Fire Station, sprang into action. Despite the grim realization that Marty had already succumbed to her injuries, they knew they needed to retrieve her remains. As they approached her lifeless form floating in the water, the massive tiger shark continued its menacing patrol, circling its quarry. Retrieving her body became a perilous endeavor, as they couldn't reach her without risking their own lives. In a daring move, they steered the boat toward the relentless predator, forcing it to retreat. Only then could they finally pull Marty's lifeless form aboard, ending the harrowing ordeal. The ferocity of the attack had left devastation in its wake. The shock rippled through the family and reverberated in the hearts of everyone who knew the compassionate 41-year-old Marty. Marty had played by all the rules. She hadn't ventured into the ocean alone, choosing to swim in the safety of daylight. The sky had been a clear, sun-soaked canvas, the water a crystalline expanse, and she was in familiar territory. It was precisely the advice the experts offered to those navigating waters known to host sharks. Marty had followed every guideline to the letter. Perhaps in her frantic attempt to escape, she had inadvertently stirred the shark's interest with her splashing, but it remained an unfortunate case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Between September and November each year, female tiger sharks migrated to Hawaii's warmer waters to give birth. During this time, the shallow reefs saw an uptick in their numbers. Marty's tragic encounter marked the first fatal shark attack witnessed in Hawaii in 33 long years. On average, Hawaii experienced 3 shark bites annually, and tiger sharks rank second in the list of most dangerous species, following only the great white. Louise was traumatized by the harrowing incident and chose to stay on the island, seeking solace among friends. In the aftermath, the Department of Land and Natural Resources took action, enlisting the expertise of shark fishermen James Stegmuller and Steve Thompson to track down and capture the responsible shark. Beaches in the vicinity were promptly closed, and a state of heightened vigilance gripped the area. Snorkeling tourists were urged to make a hasty exit, and a couple on a lilo suddenly found themselves eerily alone in the once teeming waters just meters from the shore. The shocking news rippled through the community, spreading like wildfire. But just 4 days after the gruesome attack, the shark hunt was abruptly called off. The 2 fishermen, James and Steve, faced threats from locals who held the belief that these sharks were more than just predators. They were family or personal deities. Fearing for their safety and respecting the local culture, the 2 men refused to continue the hunt, and the authorities officially closed the chapter on the search. Situated on the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia is Elliston Area School. It was in a rural community, a place where everybody knew each other. This was part of the draw for 46-year-old Simon Baccanello, who applied to teach at the school the previous year. In January 2023, he began his teaching post, teaching math, science and health, and physical education. He coached football, tennis, and junior sports. He was instantly a hit with staff and pupils alike, affectionately referred to as Mr. B. He was friendly, approachable, and dedicated. All the qualities you would want in a teacher. But his life in Elliston was about to come to a tragic and brutal end. Simon had always loved the sea. He enjoyed fishing and surfing, and where better to do both than the Eyre Peninsula? Farming is a major industry in the region, as is commercial fishing. But with the beautiful beaches, offers of swimming with dolphins or shark cage diving, tourists are also drawn to the area. Surfing is popular along many of the beaches, and Simon headed to the Great Australian Bight on May 13, 2023. When he arrived, there were around 20 others riding the waves, and he was eager to join them. He pulled on his wetsuit and casually jogged across the beach to the water, his surfboard tucked under his arm. But he couldn't possibly know that he wouldn't be leaving the water that day. Something terrible was about to happen, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. The surfing beach he chose that morning was Walker's Rocks Beach, situated 7 kilometers north of his home in Elliston. Partially sheltered by the surrounding reef and sporting a long beach, Walker's Rocks was popular with walkers, swimmers, and surfers. The group of surfers gathered 30 to 50 meters offshore. As they bobbed on the surface, they had no idea that beneath them they were in the sights of a killer predator. Simon sat on his board with his legs dangling over the edge. The water lapped at his thighs. He had always been an active and adventurous man who enjoyed sports and the great outdoors. His enthusiasm for sports came across when he coached pupils at his school. But as he sat there, bobbing up and down in the large open bay, he felt something brush against his skin. He immediately pulled his foot up and out of the water and looked down. There beneath him was a large shadow, a dark and ominous figure just inches below the surface. He watched in horror as it swung itself around and came toward him. Simon sensed the imminent danger he was in. The adrenaline started coursing through his body and his heart began thundering in his chest. But rather than think about himself, he instinctively felt the urge to warn others around him. He immediately shouted to his fellow surfers, one of them was a 13-year-old student in his school, to get out of the water. His cries were heard by the group, and they turned to look back at him. He was the furthest from the shore, a good few feet behind everyone else, and he had been singled out by the shark. In the frantic seconds that followed, the other surfers began paddling toward the beach. Young surfer Jaden Millar glanced back over his shoulder as he swam away from Simon, and that's when he saw it. Something that will stay with him for the rest of his life. He saw a gray tail reach up out of the water and the teacher disappear below the surface. There was a thrashing. The water bubbled and boiled and splashed. The tail whipped back and forth as the shark drove its victim downwards, holding him firmly in its jaws. Jaden paddled as fast as he could to get away from the horrifying scene. He pulled at the water with his arms and kicked furiously with his legs. It felt like an eternity as he inched his way to dry land and the promise of safety. Below the surface, Simon was still fighting. His leg was still attached to his surfboard as he was being pulled downwards, deeper and deeper into the abyss of the Australian Bight. Witnesses could see his surfboard above the water, being held upright as the ankle cord was pulled powerfully underwater. The cord was taut, holding the surfboard vertically up while Simon grappled with the predator below. Those on the beach and in the car park suddenly saw a rush of surfers heading for the sand. It was a scramble to make it out as quickly as possible. They saw the commotion beyond the breakers, unsure of what they had just seen. Somebody jumped into their car and started sounding the horn, trying to get everybody's attention. Then the surfboard that had been held up on its end smacked back down and lay flat on the sea's surface. It bobbed there with no sign of Simon. The cord had been cut. It had been severed, most likely by the shark's razor-sharp teeth, and Simon was dragged away, never to resurface. The State Emergency Service, located at Streaky Bay, north of Walker's Rocks, was deployed to the scene. One of the surfers called in an ambulance, but they knew there was no hope for Simon now. The attack had been so rapid, it was over within a matter of seconds. A few horrifying seconds in which a local man had lost his life. They scoured the sea for Simon's body, but only his surfboard was found. A large circular bite mark in the middle of it, providing evidence of what the much-loved teacher went through during his final moments. As news of the terrible incident spread like wildfire through the close-knit communities of South Australia, details of the attack emerged. Those who were in the water with Simon at the time of the attack attribute their lives to his courageous and heroic actions. It turns out that Simon continued to warn people to get out of the water as the attack unfolded. When he first shouted at them, it wasn't clear whether he had been bitten or had just seen the shark approaching. Then seconds later, he was attacked. During the commotion, in which he was desperately trying to fight the shark off, hitting it and kicking it with everything he had, he was still yelling for people to swim away. It seems the shark came back around a third time for him, and he was dragged underwater, never to be seen again. If there is one thing people will remember about Simon, it is his selfless heroism during the last few moments of his life. Shark experts have described just how unusual the attack was. It was the first incident at that location for more than 20 years, and for a shark to come back 3 times is very out of character. The nature of the attack led some to believe that Simon was attacked not by one, but multiple sharks. The search across land and sea continued over the following days. Helicopters took to the skies, and people combed the shoreline for any trace of the lost man. Apart from a small piece of styrofoam thought to belong to his board and a strip of black wetsuit material, nothing was ever found. The community was sent into mourning. The attack couldn't have happened to a nicer man, and the school pupils found his loss particularly hard. His funeral was held 2 weeks later, and a vigil was held at the beach where Mr. B had last been seen alive. Having no body to bury or say goodbye to felt like an especially cruel twist for Simon's family, who could only gaze out beyond the waves, knowing that Simon was somewhere out there. The Sal Hashish Resort is situated 18 kilometers south of the tourist hub of Hurghada, along Egypt's Red Sea coastline. It's a popular vacation spot. The sweeping bay, laid with coral sand and bordered by crystal-clear waters, are luxurious and enticing. The promenade, onto which 5-star hotels open out onto, stretches the entire length of the bay. On July 1, 2022, something was spotted in the bay. As some tourists stood on the pier and looked out over the glistening water, they thought they saw a dark shadow swimming in the shallows. Then perhaps a flash of gray, as a dorsal fin broke the surface a couple of hundred yards out. But they couldn't be sure. It was a momentary glimpse, and then it disappeared. It was hard to make out exactly what it was, as swimmers and snorkelers splashed about in the water, and the sun reflected off the surface of the Red Sea. Even so, they had seen enough to mention it to the lifeguards. The 2 tourists walked over to a small group of lifeguards. They told them that they thought they had seen a shark. Immediately, the lifeguards burst into laughter and told them not to worry. There hadn't ever been a shark sighted along this shoreline before. This proved to be a deadly mistake, and little did they know a woman was already dead. Romanian tourist Roxana Donason had left her hotel room 2 days before, never to return. No one had reported her missing. No one had seen her disappear beneath the waves as she snorkeled along the reef. But it was now discovered that the 44-year-old had been fatally attacked by a shark, and while her body remained in the water along the reef, it enticed sharks closer. It's believed the shark who killed her returned repeatedly to feed. Her body was discovered that morning, but incomprehensibly, the knowledge wasn't made public. Officials didn't want to alarm anyone, and of course, they didn't want the tourism trade to suffer. The woman was severely mauled and disfigured when she was pulled from the sea, but people were allowed to continue to swim, snorkel, and splash about in the waters, even though there was a killer on the loose, and possibly one that had just been spotted by the tourists on the pier. Increased shark encounters in the Red Sea have been attributed to overfishing as sharks travel closer to shore in search for a meal. Only a month before these tragic incidents, a cargo ship carrying thousands of sheep destined for the celebrations of Eid al-Adha sank south of Hurghada. All the animals on board drowned, their carcasses likely providing significant nourishment for the sea life, especially sharks. The influx of fresh meat may have enticed them to the area more so than usual that month. There are 1.2 million tourists entering the waters of the Red Sea each year, so interactions with sharks are going to happen occasionally. But if that occasion is when you're swimming, then it could be disastrous for you. Just as the lifeguards were laughing off the concerns of the tourist who had potentially spotted an ominous shadow beyond the shallows, Elisabeth Sauer, an Australian national, was entering the water. She was on the last day of her vacation and wanted to make the most of it. She had been in Egypt for a whole month with her partner, who was of Egyptian descent. She had spent a lot of time swimming and enjoyed the warm, clear waters and the reef near the shore. She said to her partner that she was going back in one more time, but it turned out to be one more time too many. She half walked, half swam in the shallows, dipping her face below the surface to look at the colorful fish darting around her feet near the reef. She was just 650 feet away from where the other tourists had been pulled from the water. Many other holidaymakers were doing exactly the same thing as Elisabeth. All carefree, all enjoying their holiday behind the relative safety of the deployed shark nets. Less than 15 minutes after it had first been sighted, that ominous shadow in the water headed toward Elisabeth. The 68-year-old pensioner was enjoying retirement and the luxuries it had to offer. She had been a local councillor for the Green Party in her local municipality of Kromsach from 1998 until 2004. She was well known in her hometown and well liked by friends and colleagues. She had a warm and calm demeanor, something that she will be remembered by. She was just yards from the beach and the safety of dry land when she was struck by the shark. It immediately grabbed her leg and yanked it firmly in its jaws. The sudden attack threw Elisabeth forward, and she wheeled around to find her leg clamped between its sharp teeth. She tried to fight back as the shark increased its intensity. It thrashed her around, and she was twisted and turned as the shark rotated through the water. Then, with the most tremendous force, Elisabeth's leg was ripped off. With her body now free, she was able to try and get away. She wasn't being dragged mercilessly by the predator, but it wasn't giving up. It continued to attack Elisabeth. It came back for more, and she continually tried to push it away, while tourists pulled out their phones and began filming the horrifying scenes. Those on the beach and the pier, including her partner, could see the attack unfolding. They could see the fight that Elisabeth was putting up. They screamed for help, for some kind of assistance, yet none came. Where were the lifeguards? People on the pier tried to distract the shark by throwing things at it, but nobody rushed into the water to save Elisabeth. No one was going to risk their life for a stranger. She was on her own. The attack continued. Then, when it was thought things couldn't get any worse, the shark ripped off Elisabeth's arm that she was using to try to push its sandpaper-like snout away from her. She was pushed onto the reef, and for a few shocking moments, she sat there, in complete shock, while the shark swam nearby. It was identified as 2 meters in length and either a mako shark or an oceanic whitetip. Blood poured from Elisabeth's missing arm and leg. She just looked at her missing limbs, trying to make sense of the situation. Terror and shock almost overcame her, but she knew she needed to get help. She needed emergency care, and yet still no one was coming for her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She was stunned. She could feel the life fading from her. She was dizzied and dazed. Her body was beginning to shut down as her blood pressure plummeted. Showing just how determined and how much of a fighter she was, she pushed herself off from the reef and swam toward the shore. Horrified onlookers could see the struggle. Elisabeth was surrounded in a pool of deep, dark red, her own blood. Somebody tried to throw her a rope for her to grab onto, but she made it to the beach by herself and immediately collapsed. She had done the hard part. She had got herself out of there. Now it was up to the medical professionals to take over. She was rushed into a waiting ambulance and to Nile Private Hospital in Hurghada, but she died on the way, reportedly from a heart attack. Paramedics tried to revive her, but her injuries were too severe. Help had arrived too late, and the lifeguards who had mocked the tourists for their concerns over a shark were nowhere to be seen. Maria Fernandez Martinez Jimenez was just 26 years old. She was a mother to her 5-year-old daughter and had recently completed her degree in marine biology at the University of Guadalajara. She enjoyed spending time at the beach. She had a love for the ocean ever since she was a child herself, and now she was taking her own child for a dip in the sea. There was nothing unusual about the day as they headed to the scenic beach. On Saturday, December 2nd, 2023, Maria and her daughter made their way to Malake Beach in the state of Jalisco in western Mexico. It's a destination that's popular with Mexican tourists, a less well-known, picturesque vacation spot. An outcrop of lava shelters the bay, and the sandy beaches stretch along the unspoiled shoreline. The warm seas and golden sands are perfect for swimming and sunbathing in the sheltered cove. That morning, a swimming race was taking place in the calm waters as Maria and her daughter undressed down to their swimming costumes and walked down to the water. They paddled in the shallows. The water was warm, it was refreshing, and the two of them laughed as they played together and splashed about. After a little while, the two of them decided to swim out to a floating platform situated 25 meters or 75 feet from the shore. They could hear the officials over the loudspeaker as the swimming race got underway. Other holidaymakers splashed in the sea all around them. The platform was always popular with families as children jumped off and into the water, splashing and laughing as they did so. Nobody was on it that day, though. They would have the whole platform to themselves. But that morning, something was about to go horribly wrong. An animal below the surface of the water swam toward the mother and daughter duo. The sounds from the swimming race nearby and the commotion in the sea from the competitive swimmers had drawn a predator to the area. It was an opportunistic hunter and always on the hunt for food. Maria and her daughter were just yards from the shore. The seafloor was only feet below them, and yet they were in imminent danger. Other tourists walked along the sand, unaware of the drama that was about to unfold. Maria and her daughter were just seconds from disaster. The predator swam upward, driving itself through the water toward the surface. As it came within inches of Maria, it opened its mouth. Suddenly, Maria felt a sharp tug on her leg and let out a cry of alarm. It felt as though she had been hit by something enormous, and then she felt a crushing sensation around her hip. The animal released her momentarily and readjusted its grip around her leg lower down. The animal had closed its immense jaws around her, holding her in a vice-like grip. Maria kicked furiously to get it off. She couldn't see what it was below the water, only the ominous dark shadow. She could feel the rough skin and the sharp teeth tearing into her leg. She tried to hit it, throwing fists into its head, trying to pry open the jaws. Although she knew she was in trouble, her only thought was the safety of her daughter. She screamed at her to swim away. Her daughter turned around to see blood pooling around her mother as she splashed in desperation. The young girl frantically made a swim for the floating platform. The horrific scene would be etched into her memory forever as she saw her mother battling with something below the surface. Moments later, Maria felt her leg give way. She couldn't tell the true severity of the situation in that moment, but when she was freed from the jaws of the marine predator, her cries were overheard by other beachgoers who rushed to her aid. They could see she was in trouble. Some had seen the attack unfolding and weren't sure what was happening, whether she was playing around or whether she was being bitten by something. A cloud of dark red surrounded the young mother as she tried to swim to shore. Others rushed into the shallows and grabbed her arms. They pulled her up onto the beach. When they looked down, they were shocked. Maria's leg had been bitten completely off. Blood poured from the open wound, turning the golden sand red all around her. As people crowded around her and tried to stem the bleeding by tying a tourniquet around her missing leg and applying pressure, Maria lost consciousness. The emergency services were called, and although paramedics arrived minutes later, they were too late. Not only had Maria lost a leg in the attack, but also suffered from a deep bite wound to her left hip. Maria had tragically lost too much blood and could not be revived. Her young daughter had witnessed a truly traumatic event, and her heroic mother, in her final moments, had hoisted her out of the water and out of harm's way. Her actions may have saved her child's life. The terrifying attack on the 26-year-old was initially assumed to be a shark, but authorities have been skeptical. Nobody saw exactly what attacked Maria. An investigation into the bite wound was not carried out. and a search for the animal proved fruitless. Cihuatlan's municipal government immediately closed the local beaches in Malake and Barra de Navidad and began an investigation into the attack. The community was left in shock. Not knowing what species had killed the young woman was a terrifying thought. There were two suspected culprits, a shark or a saltwater crocodile. Locals had never experienced any sharks approaching them along that stretch of coastline before, and crocodiles were known to live in nearby habitats. The reptiles could travel into open seawater in search of prey, such as fish, to eat. Saltwater crocodiles exhibit salt excretion glands in the backs of their tongues, which allows them to survive in salt water for extended periods of time. This allows them to travel across open water between islands. Only the year before, at 120 miles from Guadalajara, a couple of British tourists recalled their terror when they were swimming in the sea. They had heard screaming and shouting. Suddenly, everyone was running out of the water. There, gliding along the line of the surf, was an elongated shadow. The head of a large crocodile protruded through the surface of the sea, and the animal circled by the beach a number of times before disappearing from sight. There were crocodiles out there, and they posed as much a threat to people as sharks did. The swimming race that was taking place at the time of the attack was called off, and swimmers were escorted out of the water. Visitors were urged to follow the red flag warning and not to enter the water until further notice. Following the tragedy, people came to pay their respects and lay flowers on the beach where Maria lost her life. People were really moved by the passing of the young mother, who had died while saving her daughter. Crocodile attacks are rare in Mexico, but there have been attacks on tourists in recent years. In 2022, 2 American tourists were attacked as they swam in the sea, and in 2021, a British girl was attacked and almost killed when she went swimming in a freshwater river under the assurance of her guide. Shark attacks are also rare, with 95 recorded in Mexico since records began. Almost half of those proved fatal. As is often the case with attacks like this, Maria was in the wrong place at the wrong time. An hour either side of that fateful swim, and the shark or crocodile may have left the area. It was a truly heartbreaking accident, not only for Maria's family, but for those who witnessed the horrific attack. It was February 4, 2023, a sunny summer day in North Fremantle, a suburb of Perth, Australia. 16-year-old Stella Berry was having a beautiful day with her friends. The group of teenagers were enjoying the warm rays of the sun and the cooling water of Swan River. The atmosphere was greatly improved by their jet skis. The teens were having a blast, racing and laughing. At some point during the day, they even spent magical moments jumping from a nearby traffic bridge rope swing. Everything was great, just perfect for the teens and sunny personalities. At 16 years old, Stella Berry was the life of the party. Her laugh was infectious, and she was nothing but happy, vibrant, and quick-witted. Stella had her skipper's ticket and often took friends out on the river for a day of surfing. She loved the beach and the river, so spending a day at Swan River was far from unusual for the girl. The Swan River estuary flows through Perth. It's a significant part of the city's culture, providing the perfect environment for several water sports, such as rowing, jet skiing, surfing, sailing, and swimming. But Swan River is also a place for modern humans to get in touch with nature, or better yet, to remember nature rules all. The river creates a stunning contrast against the skyline of city high-rises. There are over 130 species of fish, including everything from brim, blowfish, and sharks. There are also dolphins calling the river home and making an appearance every now and then, stunning swimmers. On the afternoon of February 4, 2023, 16-year-old Stella Berry and her friends were relaxing near the Fremantle traffic bridge. The bridge links the suburbs of North Fremantle and Fremantle. As the teenagers soaked in the sun, enjoying summer, Stella spotted something in the water. She watched in awe. It was a pod of dolphins, swimming freely, not a care in their world. Their beauty was astounding. In all fairness, it must have looked like a painting. In an instant, Stella Berry shot up and alerted her friends. She wanted to go swim with the dolphins. It was an exciting plan, maybe a little bit crazy, but nothing unheard of. Stella and one of her friends got on the jet skis and rushed toward the dolphins, passing through the bridge. They stopped their jet skis near the beach. Then Stella jumped into the water, intent on swimming with the pod of dolphins. She had no way of telling what was going to happen next. The river was brown and murky. Its opaqueness made it impossible for the girl to see what was lurking in the water. It wasn't like Stella was completely clueless about the usual dangers posed by Australian waters. Not only was she a generally intelligent young woman, but she also had a particularly impressive understanding of the ocean and its sharks. Back when she was 10 years old in 2017, Stella was featured in a local paper for her design of a shark-free ocean pool for Perth's Cottesloe Beach. Her project was presented to the city council after great white sharks had been spotted in the area, and the city prompted an open call for ideas. Being ambitious and smart students, Stella and a classmate developed an impressive design and garnered praise from officials over the assignment. But perhaps her knowledge extended to the ocean. Perhaps Stella didn't know the river was as dangerous as the ocean, with hungry creatures waiting for the opportunity to strike any prey. And surely a 16-year-old swimming alone in murky waters away from shore does qualify as prey. Stella Berry didn't get too far away from her jet ski. She never reached the dolphins, never got to swim with them and create a magical, perfect moment. Instead, something big, something with huge, sharp teeth, grabbed her leg. Pain engulfed her. The water turned red as the shark kept biting the girl. Stella thrashed and tried to get away from the creature, but it was no use. The noise of her erratic movements caught the attention of several people on the shore. One of them, a local man, bravely jumped in the water and managed to get Stella on the sand. Her friends watched in shock, traumatized by the terrible state their friend was in. How was it possible? One minute, she was her usual self, laughing and joking around, and the next, there she was, gravely injured, bleeding out on the beach. Paramedics were called, but despite their best efforts, nothing could be done to save the 16-year-old student. Her injuries were horrible. Stella Berry was declared dead at the scene at about 6 p.m. A day of fun turned into a tragedy. After the incident, other people at the river were warned against entering the water. 16-year-old Joshua Banks and two of his friends had been swimming and jumping off for about an hour in that area. They had actually seen Stella approaching on her jet ski, but they had no idea about the attack. Were it not for some friendly locals, they would have returned to swim there. Friends and family tried to make sense of Stella's untimely death. Her whole community was shaken by the loss of such a promising young woman. It was the first fatal shark attack in the Swan River since 1923. Matt and Sophie Berry, Stella's parents, were devastated by the huge loss. They said in an official statement, "Stella was a vibrant and happy girl with plans of living in Europe after school. She was a caring person and was a dear friend to many across a variety of schools in the area. She had an infectious laugh, which we couldn't help laughing at too when we heard it. She was a beautiful and loving big sister and the best daughter we could have hoped for." On Sunday, a day after the attack, some of Stella's friends gathered on the banks of the river near the spot the girl was attacked. They remembered their beloved friend, crying and holding each other. Two of Stella's friends vowed to carry out their friend's wish and run a marathon in her honor and memory. Authorities declared that it was unusual for a shark to be that far down the river, but not impossible. This time of year, sharks are in the river more than normal. It's the breeding period. The females move into the river and the males chase them, said Professor Coulomb Brown, the director of higher degree research biology at Macquarie University. Authorities also admitted that while a great deal has been done to prevent shark attacks in the ocean, the river was another matter. Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan declared that implementing flying helicopter patrol isn't possible on the river because the water is brown. Other measures are being considered, such as shark barriers, which form a fully enclosed swimming area that prevents large marine creatures such as sharks from entering the area. If you're being attacked by a shark, experts advise you to always fight back. Don't look away from the animal and use your strength and size to your advantage. Since the shark's nose, eyes, and gills are extremely sensitive, you should hit those areas hard. The worst thing you could do is play dead, because sharks are known scavengers and won't say no to an easy meal. It was 2020, and Jimmy Partington was doing what he loved best. The experienced diver and shark expert was out in the Pacific Ocean, getting ready to make history. And since history is always better when there's evidence of it, Partington wasn't alone. On the contrary, he was part of a team of wildlife enthusiasts and filmmakers. Their goal was more than clear. They wanted to film an unprecedented documentary about sharks, especially great whites. And if things went according to plan, Jimmy Partington would soon come across some real-life jaws. While most of us can't imagine seeking out that kind of danger for any reason, be it pleasure, fun, or science, many people love seeing and experiencing the danger from afar by, let's say, watching chilling videos on the internet or TV specials. But someone has to film the footage. Jimmy Partington and his team had big plans for their documentary. They wanted it to be a part of Discovery's iconic Shark Week. Shark Week started out as an effort toward shark conservation and educating the public about the creatures. But over its more than 30 years of airing, the Discovery Channel programming block has become a hit, a fully fledged phenomenon. Shark Week is broadcast in over 72 countries and is promoted heavily on all types of social media. With this kind of promotion, audience, and reputation, Shark Week always has to be bigger, better, and more interesting than the previous year in order to survive and satiate shark enthusiasts. That's why filmmakers and daredevils get together to create magic and capture the most extraordinary footage out there. As Jimmy Partington and his team knew, there's nothing that fascinates the public quite like great whites. Ever since Spielberg's Jaws hit the theaters in 1975, the world has created a whole array of stories and mythologies about the creatures. That's not to say the stories are completely unfounded, if oftentimes exaggerated, but there's a reason great whites have been elected as the boogeyman of the ocean. These sharks are large, with the largest preserved specimen measuring over 19 feet in length and around 2 tons in weight. Besides their gargantuan measurements, great whites live long lives, up to 70 years or more. They can swim with speeds up to 16 miles per hour and can dive to depths of 3,900 feet. When it comes to these sharks, almost everything is a superlative. But one of these superlatives in particular makes humankind completely fascinated and terrified by this species. Great whites are responsible for the most recorded human bite incidents. To us, they are the monsters lurking beneath the surface, ready to strike and take us down, both literally and figuratively. It doesn't matter that, according to scientists, humans are far from the preferred prey of the great white shark. This species will kill us if given the chance. Jimmy Partington and his team undoubtedly knew everything about the statistics. They knew the risks, and yet they ventured out on the ocean. To Partington, it wasn't exactly a choice. This was his life, his passion, the thing closest to his heart. Over the years, Partington had worked alongside some of the most talented and respected photographers, filmmakers, and marine biologists in the entire world. He was a dive instructor and a marine photographer himself. His work took him all over the world, and that's how he became a shark expert. Partington knew a lot about sharks and their behavior, but things were about to change on that day in 2020. For the first time in a while, Partington was about to be taken by surprise by a shark. It was almost time. Partington and his team didn't know what the ocean had in store for them that day, but they were willing to wait and see. The filming crew, led by Shark Week veteran, executive producer, and director Jeff Kerr, stayed on the boat. Drones were at the ready. A camera had been submerged. Other cameras provided multiple angles of a particular stretch of ocean. The focus of the cameras? Jimmy Partington himself, dressed in full diving gear, including a snorkel and flippers. But Partington wasn't diving just yet. Instead, he was inside a protective cage, a small and clear plastic box. Part of the cage was submerged, allowing Partington to gaze down into the endless depths without being in the water himself. The ocean wasn't particularly restless that day. On the contrary, it was quite still, its color a deep blue. As Jimmy Partington crouched down at the bottom of the cage, he could see a shoal of fish swimming underneath the cage, undisturbed. But there was a much bigger fish approaching, one that Partington could see all too well, and so did the drones, filming astonishing footage. There it was, a huge great white shark slowly approaching the cage. Partington could do nothing but watch from inside the clear box and hope the strong plastic was enough to keep the huge shark at bay. The creature was indeed huge, about 16 feet, all teeth and slimy skin. It swam gently, seemingly more interested in the shoal of fish than in the human watching from inside the plastic box. Then the animal began circling the box, getting closer to it. Partington moved his head and body slowly, carefully studying the animal's behavior and cues. Every now and then, he'd come to the surface and communicate with his team. The boat was only a few feet away. In fact, Partington's cage was tied to the boat in order to secure it. The man was crouched down at the bottom of the cage when the great white swam right beneath it, right beneath him. Partington made a slow move as if to pet the shark. The animal swam away, then proceeded to circle the cage again. Then it bumped into the cage gently, again and again. Partington told the team the bumps have definitely been deliberate. It was as if the shark was assessing the cage and the man inside it. The situation deteriorated slowly but surely. The shoal of fish became restless, swimming in a flurry beneath Partington's cage. The shark picked up its speed, swimming aggressively under and around the cage. At this point, Partington was completely taken by surprise by how close the shark came, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The shark seemed to swim away from the cage before changing its course back toward Partington. This time, it came from below the cage, swimming up with great speed and determination. When it reached Partington, the creature opened its jaws and clamped them around the cage, breaking it open and capsizing it at the same time. People on the boat started screaming, shouting at Partington to swim toward the boat, but the man was momentarily overcome by panic. He tried to climb onto what remained of the cage, away from the terrifying predator which was still lurking. Partington struggled in vain to get on top of the cage. With the great white so close, he suddenly realized he had to make a break for it and just swim back to the boat. Luckily, Jimmy Partington made it to safety in one piece. The footage was included in a documentary called Great White Open Ocean and was posted online as part of Discovery Shark Week in 2022. We were able to capture this encounter on film, and it's probably the most spectacular sequence in Shark Week history. It's also miraculous because when Jimmy was hit by the shark, he didn't get a scratch on him. He actually had to swim for his life back to the boat, but he was fine, said Jeff Kerr, the film's director and producer. Jimmy Partington himself shared the footage with his online community. I can't wait for you all to see my incredible journey, including the closest I've ever been to a great white shark, the diver captioned an Instagram post. Lots of us find sharks fascinating. There's something terrifying about them, but also something that we find intriguing. They are one of the most successful predators on Earth. Their very earliest ancestors are thought to have swum the oceans 400 million years ago. They have hundreds of millions of years of instinct tucked beneath their tough, leathery skin. Killer instinct. Something that sends a chill down our spines when we enter the water, not knowing what's lurking beneath. Rows upon rows of sharp teeth. Speed, power, and agility. All traits that aid in their success. For many of us, entering the sea is an enjoyable experience. But often, at the very backs of our minds are the thoughts of sharks. A shadow beneath the surface or some seaweed brushing against our legs can set the mind racing and the heart thumping as flashbacks of Jaws the movie come rushing into our heads. We have all been gripped by the horrifying tales of men and women lost at sea, continuously circled by hungry, prowling sharks, their dorsal fins slicing through the surface as they come closer to investigate. If we look back over the past century, there have been a steady increase in shark attacks globally, but there's also been a significant increase in the global population of people. Today, that number stands at over 8 billion people. In 1950, however, the global population was just 2.5 billion. So with more people in the world and more people venturing into the sea, you are bound to get more human shark encounters. And that means more shark attacks. However, if you look at the statistics and consider the shark attack rate, then it tells a different story. This is calculated as how many shark attacks occur per billion people, and this has remained fairly consistent and incredibly low over the past century or so. In 1950, the shark attack rate was 0.012 per billion people, and in 2020, the rate was 0.010 per billion people. Despite this relatively unchanged attack rate, scientists have seen a rise in shark activity in our coastal waters, and there appears to be a logical explanation for this. Climate change. As we all know, the sea temperature is rising, and with it, the organisms and the marine ecosystem are being affected. 2023 saw the highest global temperatures in 100,000 years. Even the slightest change in sea temperature can have significant effects on some organisms. Salinity can be affected by temperature, which can be catastrophic for marine animal and plant life. Their tolerance to change is very low, and even the smallest variation can be catastrophic. A rise in water levels can also affect those who live on or near the shore, as well as the ocean currents that so many species rely on. Sharks prefer cooler waters. As the water temperature heats up, they are being forced out of their natural hunting grounds. They are migrating into colder waters, heading closer to the poles. This means that sharks are now being spotted in areas where they never used to be. Between 2014 and 2020, the normal northern boundary for juvenile great white sharks in the Pacific Ocean moved northwards by 600 kilometers. The younger, smaller sharks cannot maintain their body temperature in the cold waters, where the adults can. But as the sea temperatures rose, they began to move northwards, becoming prevalent in California's Monterey Bay. There may soon be warning signs on beaches across the UK or other European coastlines, alerting people to the potential dangers of entering the sea. In fact, around the UK, there are 40 species of shark, which is the highest there's ever been, and this is likely to rise to around 60 species in the near future. Beachgoers will have to begin adhering to safety advice that is more typical of Australia or Florida than Europe or more northern countries. Furthermore, the rising sea temperatures have altered the ocean's currents and therefore the dispersal of sharks' natural prey. They are having to hunt further and harder to find food, drawing them closer and closer to our shores. Overfishing has depleted their natural source of food, and destruction of marine habitats, such as coral reefs, mean that sharks are under more pressure than ever to search for their prey. When a shark attack does occur, shark experts are often quick to point out that sharks are under immense strain with depleting fish stocks. Tragedies in the Red Sea caused by shark attacks have been attributed to overfishing. A loss of the shark's typical food source, such as tuna, is driving them into shore, where they sense potential prey as people splash about in the shallows. It's difficult to blame the sharks for looking elsewhere for food. Not only are the rising global temperatures affecting the behavior of sharks, but it's also affecting our behavior. More people are frequenting the beach than ever as we bask in the summer sun. Heat waves are becoming longer, more frequent, and more intense. In the U.S., heat wave frequency has tripled since the 1960s, and that is only going to get worse as climate change grips the globe. With scorching temperatures, where are people going to go to cool down? Most likely, the beach. More sunshine means more dips in the ocean and an increase in activities like snorkeling, surfing, and paddleboarding. For a hungry shark drawn to the nutrient-rich coastal waters in search for prey, they are more likely than ever to encounter a human. And when they do, that's when disaster can strike and headlines are made. When the Jaws movie came out in 1975, there was a significant drop in beachgoers for the next few years as the Jaws effect took hold. People were too afraid to enter the water. Sharks were made out to be monstrous eating machines that attacked everyone in sight. People avoided the beach during their vacations, and as a result, shark attacks plummeted. Now, with increased sightings in places where sharks are not known to frequent, you'd be forgiven for thinking that their numbers are on the rise. But that's not true. In fact, 100 million sharks are killed by humans every year. In the past 50 years alone, 70% of the world's population of sharks and rays has been lost. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Fewer sharks means safer seas for us, surely. Not exactly. Sharks are one of the ocean's top predators, and without them, the entire ecosystem could collapse. They stop the predatory fish that consume the same fish we eat from overpopulating the seas and diminishing our fish stocks and forcing fisheries to shut down. They keep everything in check. What happens at the top of the food chain has a knock-on effect lower down. They keep the predatory fish populations below them in balance, which in turn keeps herbivorous fish at healthy levels and prevents the seagrass and algae from dominating coral reefs. Not only do they inadvertently help to keep our food on the table, but they also bring in a serious amount of cash where ecotourism thrives. Despite their terrifying reputation, people are still fascinated by them, and they can make a significant difference to the local economy. A single reef shark in the Bahamas can earn the country $250,000 from tourism, and in Belize, a whale shark can bring in a staggering $2 million over its lifetime. However, because of their significance in the food chain and now their change in behavior and migration, they are having an impact on other wildlife that wouldn't normally be exposed to them. The changing sea conditions are forcing predator and prey closer together. In Monterey Bay, the great white sharks that have recently established a home there have decimated the sea otter population. Scientists have recorded sea otter numbers to have dropped by 86% since the arrival of the juvenile great whites. Locals have understandably become concerned with the new arrivals. Although they are considered juveniles, they can still be 6 or 7 feet long and deliver a devastating bite. But shared knowledge about sharks can help keep us and them safe. Since 1950, California has seen a 91% drop in shark attacks, thanks to education and awareness campaigns. We owe a lot to sharks, even though they can pose a threat to our safety when we enter their domain. We should treat them with respect. Kimon Bisogno lived with the love of her life, Diego Milesi, in Cape Town, South Africa. The two had met while on holiday in Ibiza. There was an instant attraction between them, but it was their love for cooking that sealed their bond. Diego was easily persuaded to move from his home in Italy to Kimon's native South Africa, and the two of them took the plunge and opened an Italian restaurant together in Cape Town. Fernando's Pizza and Takeaway was popular with locals and tourists alike. When the COVID pandemic struck, it was touch and go whether their business would survive. On top of that, the two of them now had a young daughter to take care of. Times were tough, but through their resilience and hard work, both they and their restaurant survived the pandemic. Once their business was back in full swing again and doing well, the couple and their now 5-year-old daughter Luna decided to take a well-earned break. In September 2022, they drove 300 miles from Cape Town to the picturesque coastline of Plettenberg Bay. The spectacular coastal scenery of the Western Cape was inviting, with its postcard-perfect sandy beaches stretching for miles, its turquoise waters and wooden walkways cutting across the sand dunes. It was a bank holiday weekend for Heritage Day, a day on which all South Africans are encouraged to celebrate their culture. The young family treated themselves to the luxury Beacon Island Hotel complex for 3 days. The hotel, situated along the world-famous garden route, was surrounded by the sandy beach and clear water. On September 25th, they were up early. Luna was excited about their holiday, and they decided to head to the beach first thing to beat the crowds. It was just past 7 a.m. when they wandered onto the sand. Others were already in the sea. While Luna and Diego started playing with the sand, Kimon decided to take a dip in the water. It would be a refreshing start to the day. A quick swim to wake her up before the three of them headed back to the hotel for some breakfast. But below the waves, a predator was lurking. It was swimming purposefully along the shoreline a little way out. It was a great white shark, always on the hunt for an easy meal. The infamous sardine run had ended the month before. This is a time during which the coastal waters come alive with a plethora of marine wildlife, as predators follow the sardines while they migrate southwards along South Africa's west coast, and then up its east coast. Swimming during the sardine run is considered dangerous due to the large number of sharks that are drawn to the waters as they take advantage of the likes of sea lions, which are feeding on the sardines and other fish in the area. But the sardine run was now over. Swimming was considered relatively safe again. Sharks bring in millions to the South African economy every year as they draw tourists from far and wide to experience shark diving. It's considered one of the best places in the world to view them. The thrill of being lowered into the water in a steel cage while sharks are enticed to within feet with fresh bait is considered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But shark dive operators often find that tourists are surprised by how docile the sharks appear to be. Under the water, they don't seem to be the mindless killing machines that people have been led to believe. They are often timid at first before taking a cautious bite of the food on offer. Despite this, great white sharks have earned their reputation as terrifying killers for a reason. Of all the shark attacks worldwide, great white, tiger, and bull sharks are responsible for the most. As Kimon paddled in the water, the great white shark that was patrolling the coastline altered its course. Instead of swimming parallel to the beach, it now turned toward the swimmers in the water. It spotted Kimon's legs in the shallows. She was only waist deep, just yards from her family, but she didn't know the imminent danger she was in. The shark approached, hidden beneath the surface, and then it came in for the kill. The 13-foot giant crashing through the arc of a wave. It rushed at Kimon, opening its jaws wide and bringing them down around her waist. Kimon felt a tremendous force as she was knocked off her feet. It was like being hit by a truck. In a matter of seconds, Kimon had suffered catastrophic injuries. Those in the water at the same time as her screamed. They could see the attack unfolding, the water splashing and bubbling all around the victim. The other tourists ran out of the water in panic, each fearing for their own lives. The shark's teeth had severed arteries and torn through muscle. Lifeboats from the National Sea Rescue Institute were alerted immediately and leapt into action. They powered over to the scene while Kimon's family looked on helplessly. There was nothing anyone could do. It was too dangerous to enter the water, and the attack had been so rapid that Kimon lay motionless in the water within a matter of minutes. There was no bringing back the young mother, and for her daughter to have witnessed it was both shocking and devastating. Kimon's loss would be borne by all who knew her. She was a kind and gentle soul, always looking out for others. In fact, every Wednesday she helped run the Ob's Pasta Kitchen in Cape Town, providing nutritious and free meals for the poor and needy. That was the kind of person she was. She always put others before herself. Following the tragedy, Batu municipality shut down the beach and erected signs to warn swimmers away. There was fear amongst the community. This was the second fatality in just 3 months, and prior to 2011, 11 years earlier, there had never been any shark attacks in Plettenberg Bay. Was there a reason these attacks were suddenly on the rise? Most experts believe that this was just incredibly bad luck for those who had tragically lost their lives. With more people entering the water than ever before due to the rising interest in surfing, paddleboarding, and snorkeling, there were always bound to be more human-shark interactions. Naturally, great whites pursue prey near the coastline. The species they typically hunt include sea lions and seals that fish in the coastal waters. A silhouetted swimmer on the surface of the sea, or splashing in the shallows, can be mistaken for a sea lion coming up for air or fishing for its prey. But a mistaken bite can often prove deadly. Sharks tend to leave Plettenberg in October and head to other waters. Their presence is often dictated by orca activity, as orcas often prey on sharks. When the orcas arrive, the sharks disappear. The day after the attack on Kimon, there were discussions about a Plet shark action plan. These had begun after the previous fatal attack just months before, but nothing had been finalized. Lifeguards weren't on duty at the time of the attack because it was out of season. Local officials recommend that people only swim at lifeguarded beaches. Some suggested that shark spotters should be placed at high points along the beach, using drone technology to search for approaching sharks. As well as this, the Plet Shark Action Group investigated the cost for installing stationary cameras, specialized water monitoring software, and specialized monitors to analyze shark activity and notify authorities for beach closures. Sadly, though, for Kimon and her family, these changes came too late. Khai Cowley, a native of Maslin Beach, was a third-generation roder, a member of the Seaview Road Board Riders Surf Club, following in the footsteps of his uncle and his grandfather before him. With a natural talent for riding the waves, he was not only a standout talent in the sport, but brought positive energy and good vibes to the club. He was especially encouraging to the younger members of the club, always wanting to make their time on the beach a positive one. He and his father were traveling to Ethel Beach, a small beach on the York Peninsula of South Australia, named after a ship which wrecked there over a century ago. The beach is well known as a great spot for strong surfers, often producing strong, tall waves. The weather was still nice enough that the beach was populated with locals from the nearby town of Marion Bay, out to enjoy the sand, surf, and warmth. Many of them were also surfers like Khai, looking to take advantage of the gusty weather for some practice. That weather, which made for tall waves and surfable swells, also created ideal conditions for ambush predators like the formidable great white shark. The water was clouded with silt stirred up by the waves, and froth and bubbles from the winds reduced visibility to almost zero. And when the prey can't see the predator, it's the ideal time for them to hunt. Out there among the waves, out of the view of the beachgoers, was a great white shark, one of the top predators of the Australian Ocean. Sharks of any kind were an uncommon sighting at the beach, and to see a great white in the area was even more rare. With the cloudy conditions, the shark had seen its chance to hunt in new waters, in search of a bounty of prey. The massive shark was almost completely hidden in the waves. If anything was visible, it would only have been its dorsal fin cutting through the surface of the ocean. But with the murky water and the froth from the waves, even the most attentive of surfers might not have seen it until it was too late. The shark, sensing something in the water that was large and warm, moved in silently. All predators have to make quick decisions when it comes to what might be a potential meal, and a great white shark is no different. A surfer and a seal both seem a worthwhile target to a shark, and this one was tragically about to close in on the former. Circling Khai, the shark knew one thing. What was in front of it was a live creature, and this was its chance to feed. Once it had a clear shot, it lunged. Whether it immediately sunk its teeth into the young surfer in a sneak attack, or if the first contact was part of the bump and bite behavior sharks are known to exhibit when feeding, we'll never know for sure. But that first bite was critical. The jaws of the great white shark can deliver 4,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, and combined with serrated razor-sharp teeth up to 3 inches long, this was more than enough to tear through muscle and bone, and to sever Khai Cowley's leg. If there was any chance for him, however slim, he needed to get out of the water. As a fading Khai Cowley struggled to swim back to shore, his father, who had witnessed the attack, raised the alert. He wasn't the only one who had witnessed the violent attack. Another local surfer, Tim Phillip, had seen it all from a nearby cliff face. Realizing that the situation was critical, he didn't hesitate. Tim leapt into action, grabbing a stranger's surfboard and leaping into the water, paddling out to Khai, who had fallen unconscious by now. The danger hadn't passed. As Tim grabbed the young surfer, he saw the telltale shape of the shark returning, circling the two of them, and he could see the size of the massive beast. The shark was almost 4 meters long, 13 feet. A great white shark as long as an average sedan was a terrifying encounter, and he could see what it had done to Khai. With the shark approaching, he had no choice but to back off again, releasing the surfer and retreating for his own safety. But when the shark lost interest a few moments later and continued out to sea, Kim acted once again. He knew that if he didn't go back for Khai, there might not be another chance to bring him back. He knew that at this point, the chance to save him was slim. He had lost so much blood from the bite wounds that had severed his leg, but he couldn't bear the thought of his body being lost to the sea. He knew this boy had family and friends who loved him, and no matter what, they would want to see him brought home. All the commotion had raised alarms back on the beach, and by the time they had reached the shore, paramedics were waiting. Even with the relative isolation of the beach, they were on scene almost immediately with the aid of an air ambulance. Shark attacks are always a cause for immediate action. Their teeth can do a terrifying amount of damage, leaving ragged edges and causing deep damage through all layers of the body, even down to the bone. In this case, everyone knew it was dire. This was not only a bite wound, the shark had managed to fully sever his leg. Even in a fully equipped hospital, this kind of injury would be incredibly difficult to treat. After the trauma of the injury and the massive amount of blood he had lost, paramedics were unable to revive Khai Cowley, and he was pronounced dead on scene. Local residents were surprised to find police roadblocks keeping visitors from accessing the beach that afternoon. And when the news spread that the reason behind the blockade was the fatal incident at the beach, the nearby town of Marion Bay was in shock. Despite the water surrounding South Australia being a prime location for water sports, shark attacks were uncommon, and fatal shark attacks have always been rare, with only 11 on record since the year 2000. And with them being such a rarity, when one happens, it makes them all the more shocking. Everyone in the town will remember this attack for years to come. Surfers know they share the waters with wildlife, and that sharks make their homes in the oceans alongside them. No matter how many precautions one takes, there's always that chance of danger. And when a shark strikes out of the blue, everyone takes notice, and everyone will mourn. Surf clubs across South Australia have been posting tributes to Khai Cowley. Both Microgram's Junior Surf Club and Surfing South Australia have spoken out online, remembering the teenager as talented and dearly loved, and many independent sentiments have been pouring in from across the country and across the internet. As much as this tragedy has affected family, friends, and everyone who knew him, no one is willing to let this keep them from the waves. But it is a heartbreaking reminder to always be aware, to keep your guard up, and to always pay attention to the conditions of the waters you are about to enter. Located off the east coast of Madagascar lies the French territory of Reunion Island. It's a volcanic island steeped in mountainous, rugged terrain and fringed by golden, sandy beaches. But the perception of beauty is in stark contrast to what lies hidden in the surrounding waters. Although the island is just 970 square miles, it's one of the most common places for shark attacks in the whole world. Despite being so small in size, it's believed that 16% of the world's shark attacks happen there, and worryingly, these seem to be on the rise. A change in water temperature is drawing large sharks closer to shore, and there is one particular stretch of coastline on Reunion Island that is particularly dangerous. Surfers and swimmers are strongly advised not to enter the water. Signs are erected all along the beaches warning people of the dangers, and yet people still go swimming or surfing in the seas. This hotspot for shark attacks doesn't seem to deter people. This is exactly what happened when 28-year-old Frenchman Kim Mahbouli was visiting the island with his friends. The surf was too good to pass up the opportunity. However, whilst his friends at least took some precautions against shark attacks by wearing shark deterrent devices on their ankles, for some reason Kim did not. After pulling on their wetsuits, they grabbed their boards and headed into the Indian Ocean. They had chosen to surf from the small seaside village of Saint-Loup. The place was known as Turtle Spot on the island's west coast. It's one of the best places in the world to view sea turtles, and there is a center situated there called Kelonia, which is a public aquarium and observatory dedicated to the education about the conservation of sea turtles. Kim and his three friends ignored official warnings of the dangers of sharks and began surfing at the prohibited spot. The seas around Reunion were changing from the warmer summer to the cooler winter months, a seasonal change in the conditions that attracts sharks closer to shore. As the four friends hit the waves late in the afternoon, a shark was swimming just below them. It was hunting in the area and immediately spotted the shadowy figures above it. Kim was about to become the 24th person to be attacked off Reunion's waters in just 8 years in what has been dubbed as Shark Highway. The seas between Australia and South Africa are a hotspot for sharks and lie just south of the island. Shark swam upwards, powering through the water column. Its eyes were fixed on the surfer sitting on the surface. Kim was unaware of the predator surging toward him. He continued to bob about on his surfboard, glancing over his shoulder at the waves as they built behind him. His friends were doing the same thing just feet away. Suddenly, he felt a sharp tug on his left leg and immediately looked down into the dark eyes of an enormous shark. It had torpedoed upwards and crashed through the surface of the Indian Ocean, grabbing Kim's leg in its jaws. Its head was visible above the water, a terrifying sight that sent shockwaves through Kim. But there was no time to dwell on it. With one tug, Kim was pulled underwater. His three friends saw the commotion. The water was boiling and splashing where Kim had been just moments before. His surfboard bounced up and down as Kim was dragged underneath it, his ankle still attached to the ripcord. They swam over to him, but he had disappeared into the depths. They peered into the water, but they couldn't see him. The shark's razor-sharp teeth sliced through the cord, and it snapped. After a frantic search for their friend, but with no sign of him, the three terrified friends made a dash for dry land in a bid to get help. Shouting as they paddled furiously to the shore, some eyewitnesses could see that they were in trouble and called the emergency services. When word got out of the shark attack, lifeguards rushed to the spot in their speedboat. It was a race against time to find Kim. Under the water, he had battled. The shark held him firmly in its powerful jaws, biting down with a bite force of 1,300 psi. Kim tried to free his leg. He could feel himself fading. His lungs were bursting. He looked up at the surface, shards of sunlight penetrating into the water. The shark thrashed its head from side to side, and the agonizing pain ripped through Kim's body. Then seconds later, his leg came off. The shark swam away with Kim's left leg in his mouth, and the surfer bobbed up to the surface and took in a lungful of air, but he had lost a significant amount of blood. He was fading fast. The adrenaline was hiding the worst of the pain, but his heart rate was slowing and his blood pressure plummeting dangerously low. He was losing consciousness. His femoral artery had been severed, and he was now floating in the Indian Ocean just offshore in a cloud of red. It engulfed him. Moments later, a speedboat tore through the water. The hum of the engine went unnoticed by the 28-year-old as he closed his eyes and let his head flop backwards. The crew from the lifeboat spotted him and dragged him from the water. He was pale and unresponsive. He had lost his left leg from the upper thigh down. The shark had sliced through his muscle and bone, severing it from his body with one bite. They rushed Kim to shore and he was loaded into the back of an ambulance. Sadly, the young surfer could not be revived, and he lost his life that day. His friends and the locals in the small fishing village watched on as the ambulance drove away from the scene. They were in shock. But they weren't strangers to the attacks around Reunion Island. It seemed that despite the swimming and surfing bans, people still weren't heeding the warnings. The turquoise waters were so inviting, and the island appeared to be paradise on earth, but its hidden dangers were the stuff of nightmares. The following year in 2020, there were 57 shark attacks in Reunion's waters. 10 of those proved fatal. But what is driving the ever-increasing shark attacks in those particular seas? It's worrying that attacks like this are happening more and more often. Experts believe that either there is a change in the number of sharks in the area or a change in their behavior. Transforming sea temperatures are largely blamed for the excessive shark attacks off Reunion, while in other parts of the world, shark experts are quick to point out that human attacks are usually cases of mistaken identity. Dr. Blake Chapman, a marine biologist who examines shark neuroscience for her PhD, doesn't think that this is always the case. The fact that there are so many attacks off Reunion Island, and the nature of the attacks as well, suggests to her that the sharks are deliberately hunting humans. and that makes for a very scary prospect. Zac Young was a talented surfer who had just gotten his driver's license and was pumped to go on his first surfing road trip with a small group of his friends, Shaden Schrader, Kurt Gillen, and Lindsay Isaac. At just 19 years old, he had earned the honor of being considered by friends and community members alike one of the nicest kids someone could meet. Zac was a good-hearted kid who was always trying to help people, and over the years he had earned many awards for sportsmanship, as well as being a dedicated surfer who had been surfing for almost all of his life. He was also a committed Christian who was fun-loving and well-known in his community. He even worked with schools and homeless youth with the Youth for Christ organization. Zac would talk to school students about values, the hurdles he had faced, and how he overcame them during his party life phase 2 years earlier. The group surfing trip brought them to Campbell's Beach in New South Wales, Australia. 500 meters of beautiful golden sand, perfect for sunbathing and beachcombing, stretched out before them. Campbell's Beach was even great for water activities, like swimming, snorkeling, fishing, and most importantly for the group of friends, surfing. However, this beach sits along the coast of the South Pacific Ocean. The South Pacific Ocean covers a major part of the Southern Hemisphere, and records from this ocean are scarce because large parts are covered by deep sea basins. These sea basins are often too deep for exploration, making them unsuitable to obtain records from. So most of the available data we have from the South Pacific Ocean comes from the data of surrounding continents as educated guesses. Not to mention, it was reported that coral reef bays in the South Pacific Ocean have large populations of endangered species. So there's no knowing exactly what is below those Pacific waters. Mix that with the coast of Australia, and I bet only the brave would walk into the waters of a beach like Campbell's. The locals will also tell you that Reeks Point, off of Campbell's Beach, is a place that's heavily populated by sharks. So it wouldn't be too surprising to find a tiger shark lurking in its waters. For those of you who don't know, tiger sharks are named for the dark vertical stripes these sharks have when they're young. As they age, the lines begin to fade and almost disappear. They are scavengers with excellent senses of sight and smell, with a nearly limitless diet menu. They are second only to great whites in attacking people, but because they aren't picky eaters, they are more likely to continue eating away at a human than swimming away, as great whites frequently do. Either way, it didn't take the group of teenagers long to get out to a break known as The Well, 100 meters offshore of Reeks Point, north of Coffs Harbor, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. It's safe to say that no one was expecting what was about to happen moments later. At around 2 p.m., the unsuspecting Zac was happily enjoying his day in the water with his friends, completely unaware of the danger lurking closer and closer to him. Suddenly, sharp teeth sunk into the flesh of his legs and tore into him. His friends quickly jumped to his rescue. They courageously struggled against the shark to free their friend. In a short amount of time, the shark let go, granting the boys a terrifying victory over the beast. However, it wasn't over yet. The boys still had to make the 15-minute paddle back to the shore. The knowledge that the shark could have been circling below as they fled sent terrifying shockwaves of adrenaline through their bodies. One of the boys, Lindsay, believed the shark was at least an 8-foot-long tiger shark. Yet these 3 brave boys managed to pull through and bring Zac to the safety of the shore. Tragically, their courageous acts went unrewarded, as their efforts weren't enough to save Young in time. As he bled to death in the water, Zac managed to tell the heroic trio, "I love you guys. I love you," as his last words before going into cardiac arrest and dying on the beach. The boys, unable to believe they had lost their friend, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived. The vicious attack initiated a shark incident response plan. Surf Life Saving New South Wales immediately closed the beaches around Reeks Point, and water police started patrolling the area late on Saturday night. Lifeguards warned Coffs Harbor hotels not to allow their guests to go down to the beaches. Meanwhile, water police, marine rescue, and surf life-saving volunteers searched the area for the shark. A shark biologist even traveled to the scene to study the attack pattern so they could identify the species of shark. A detailed forensic analysis of Zac's wounds was also completed. The study included an analysis of the jaw width, which was compared to the 3 main predatory shark species in the area, eventually confirming that a 3-meter-long tiger shark was responsible for the attack, fitting the description given by Zac's friends. Weeks prior, hundreds of surfers had traveled to Coffs Harbor for the National Bodyboarding Championships. Those hundreds quickly became mourners for the young surfer and paid tribute along with Zac's friends, family, and community members at Grace Church, which was the teens' hometown church. Zac's brother Michael fought back tears, describing his brother's strength of character. His heartfelt speech included quotes such as, "All of us know you have left for now, but you will always be alive in our hearts, and we will smile every time you cross our minds." In the wise words of Zacy, "Don't cry, keep your eyes dry, and get by. You were loved by so many because you loved too much." A smile so big, it tears through a saddened heart. After the service, up to 400 surfers and bodyboarders gathered on Town Beach in Port Macquarie, where they joined in prayer. They then paddled out into the ocean, where they held a minute's silence. Thousands of people also visited the Facebook tribute page set up in memory of the young surfer, where friends praised him as a positive, happy person who lived life to the fullest and as someone who was always looking out for others. However, that wasn't the only place people came to mourn online. Zac's second-to-last post on his Facebook page was a call-out to his friends to join him for a surf. With his friends struggling to come to terms with his death after the brutal mauling, that post served as a place for people to leave behind messages of tribute and friendship. Some of their quotes were sorrowful yet uplifting messages like this: "Miss you, Zac. You made the world a better place. Your presence lit up the room when you entered. Your smile made a difference, and your words were uplifting. Love you, brother. I know you're surfing the sickest barrels in heaven right now." However, some of his friends managed to pull through during these tough times. Even though the shark attack was one of the scariest experiences a young group of teenagers could face, one of the boys who rescued Zac still said they would get back into the water, as that's what Zac would have wanted for them. Christmas was fast approaching in December 2021. Tomas had decided to spend the festivities in Morro Bay, California. While in the northern state, Tomas developed a love for the ocean. Anything to do with the water he enjoyed, whether it was fishing, diving, or bodyboarding. He loved the outdoors and the thrill of adventure. At 41 years old, he worked with his father Scott in Sacramento. On December 23, 2021, Tomas left his home in Sacramento and made his way 300 miles south to Morro Bay. A popular seaside city, Morro Bay is most famous for Morro Rock, a large volcanic rock protruding from the mouth of the harbor, reaching 576 feet above the surface of the sea. The sandy beach and views across the bay and the towering Morro Rock are a real draw for visitors, as is the surfing and bodyboarding. The following day, on Christmas Eve, Tomas headed down to the water from his mother's house. He was planning on bodyboarding that morning before spending the rest of the day with his mother and brother and preparing for Christmas Day. But tragically, he would never have the chance to open his presents the next day. As he pulled on his wetsuit and trotted across the sand, his fate had been sealed. He headed towards what is known as the Pit. Situated near the base of Morro Rock, the Pit is slightly off the beaten track and is a great surfing spot. The waves in Morro Bay are biggest in the winter, usually averaging 6 feet in height. It was to be an exhilarating morning before Tomas settled down for the festivities ahead. Although the water was cold, his wetsuit soon warmed him as he entered the water at around 10:30 that morning. There were other surfers already riding the waves when he paddled out. The conditions were quite poor. In fact, they were described by some as horrendous, but they didn't stop the devoted surfers from a Christmas Eve paddle. Tomas was enjoying himself as the waves propelled him to shore over and over again. But something was making its way along the coastline. A marine predator. An opportunistic hunter that was always on the lookout for a meal. Seals and sea otters are common in the waters at Morro Bay. They provide food for great white sharks as they dart in and out of the seaweed and kelp forests below the waves. A great white shark swam below the surface. Above it, he could make out the outline of 41-year-old Tomas as he straddled his bodyboard. The water was turbid from recent rainfall. The visibility was poor. Whether it was a case of mistaken identity or whether it considered Tomas as prey, it decided then and there to engage. It suddenly torpedoed upwards, its tail driving it through the water column with power and speed. Its greatest asset was its element of surprise. As it came within feet of the oblivious bodyboarder, it opened its jaws and made contact, powering into Tomas with such force that he was sent flying from his bodyboard. He didn't know what had hit him, and as the teeth closed down around his head and shoulder, the force was unbearable. The damage caused by the bite was devastating, something that Tomas wouldn't have been able to dwell on, as the attack was over within minutes. This is the most likely scenario, as nobody witnessed the attack. Nobody knows if Tomas was able to fight back or whether the damage was so devastating that he was dead within seconds. The great white released his grip, dived below the surface, and circled back around. It reappeared beside the stricken bodyboarder, its head emerging from the water, breaking through the surface as it bit down once more, this time around Tomas's chest. Then, as quickly as it arrived, the shark swam away without taking Tomas with it. He now lay unconscious in the water, face down, still attached to the ankle cord to his bodyboard. Rebecca Frimmer was also surfing that morning. As she was waiting for her next wave, she noticed a bright blue bodyboard bobbing about in the water. It was being dragged toward the shore with each wave, but something was holding it back. She pulled up alongside the bodyboard and pulled at the cord. When the body rolled over, her heart leapt as she realized this wasn't a drowned victim, this was a shark attack victim. She pulled him to the shore and shouted at some people on the beach. They were walking along the sand, taking in the scenery when Rebecca splashed frantically in the shallows, dragging Tomas's body onto dry land. Others rushed to Rebecca's aid, but tragically Tomas had already succumbed to his injuries. Emergency services were called, and they arrived a few minutes later at 10:48. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Then came the heartbreaking reality of informing his family. They received the worst phone call of their lives on Christmas Eve, a time that should be spent celebrating with family and friends. Following the autopsy on Tomas, the evidence raised more questions about the specifics of the attack than answers. Tomas had been bitten on the right shoulder, right side of his chest cavity, and on the head. On his chest, there were two distinctive arcs where the shark had readjusted his grip and bitten down a second time. The radius of these arcs was 16 inches, or 40 centimeters, an enormous bite that led to his untimely death. As is often the case with sharks, a tooth had become dislodged from its jaws during the attack and was found in Tomas's back. DNA evidence left by the shark determined it to have been a great white. Where the shark had bitten down on Tomas's head, he had suffered fractures on the right side of the skull. Great white sharks can bite down with a force of 4,000 psi, allowing them to crush their prey as well as slice open skin and muscle from their sharp teeth. Tomas's ribs on both the left and right sides were also crushed. The coroner reported that the cause of death was determined to be from blunt force trauma that took his life in a matter of minutes. Morro Bay Harbor Patrol shut down the beach immediately following the attack. It reopened the following day, but people were warned to stay out of the water for 24 hours. They took a boat out to clear the water of any other swimmers or surfers. The conditions were quite rough. Heavy rainfall had churned the seas up, reducing visibility in the water. Murky water is common when shark attacks occur. Experts often refer to the case of mistaken identity, especially when visibility is poor. The last time a shark attack was reported in San Luis Obispo County was 2 years before, when a surfer was injured at Montana de Oro. It was 18 years earlier when a fatality happened in 2003. A woman who was swimming with sea lions in Avila Beach was attacked and killed. Human-shark interactions that have occurred along the coastline of California have been recorded since 1950. Interactions are counted as any incident where a shark has come into contact with a person, kayak, or surfboard unprovoked, whether they cause injury or not. Between 1950 and 2021, there were 201 incidents in California. 107 of those caused injury, with 15 resulting in fatalities. Most of those incidents involved great white sharks. They are drawn to the California coast due to the abundance of prey, like sea lions and otters. The warming seas, due to global warming, are bringing them further north along the west coast of the U.S. than ever before. Paia Bay on Maui's north shore is a beautiful surfing and bodyboarding spot. With its long stretch of white sandy beach and large breakers just offshore, it's popular with locals and visitors alike. The northern shores are known for their perfect combination of natural beauty and tranquility. Green sea turtles frequent the area, and the views out over the Pacific Ocean are breathtaking. Where better, then, to surf? That's what 39-year-old Jason Carter thought when he headed to the bay from his home in nearby Haiku on December 30th, 2023. The surf was good, but the water was murky. Jason was a very experienced surfer. He was an avid outdoorsman, enjoying fishing and surfing, and even spending a winter season in a ski resort in Oregon in the years before. He loved being outdoors and amongst nature. It was a part of who he was. But when he entered the water that day, he was swimming to his disastrous fate. A hidden danger lurked, one that everyone thinks about but pushes to the backs of their minds, thinking that it'll never happen to them. It was a shark, and although the waters around Hawaii are full of them, attacks are relatively rare, especially given the number of people who enter the water each and every year. As Jason joined the other surfers on his board, the shark approached the bay. It was mid-morning, just before 11 a.m. The shark was on the hunt, an opportunistic hunter, always on the lookout for an easy meal. Jason bobbed up and down on his surfboard, not knowing that this would be his last surf. He had been to that spot 100 times before. Now his legs dangled precariously into the murky Hawaiian seas. From below the water surface, the surfers on top looked like silhouettes, perhaps a seal or sea lion floating on the surface. The shark swam up through the water column, up toward the small group of surfers. But it wasn't powering through the water, aiming to knock any of the surfers sky high into the air in a surprise encounter. Instead, it was investigating the potential prey. Perhaps the poor visibility had made it cautious. That's when Jason and his friends saw it. The truly terrifying sight of a dorsal fin slicing through the water just feet from where they hovered on their boards. One witness described the fin as large as Jason, who was sitting on his board just a couple of feet away. It was of megalodon-sized proportions. The tip of the dorsal fin was almost as high as Jason's head as he sat there. The terror that ran through their veins as they realized that the shark had come to investigate them, and how immensely huge it was like nothing they had ever experienced before. But the most terrifying part was yet to come. As Jason and the other surfers instinctively tried to swim away from the shark, its enormous head popped up right next to Jason's board. Its dark gray snout glistening out of the water, its rough skin dripping wet. Behind it was the large shadow of the rest of its body that disappeared below the surface. Jason stared straight into one of its dark black eyes. It was jet black and unblinking, an enormous round thing in the side of the shark's head. The shark's mouth was agape, wide open, displaying rows of razor-sharp teeth. A split second later, the dark eyes rolled back in its head, a protective instinct as it went in for the kill. Jason knew this was it, but there was nowhere for him to go. The shark lunged forward, and its powerful jaws came crashing down around Jason and his board. He instinctively kicked out at the shark, but he couldn't secure a decent hit on it. Unable to maneuver away, Jason was at the mercy of the shark. The shark's sharp teeth tore through his torso like a knife through butter. The sheer force of the bite was unbelievable. Jason screamed. Another surfer raced to the shore to call for help, but Jason tried to fight back. The shark had him in its grip and pulled him from his board. Jason tried desperately to hold on to his board. He tried not to get sucked down below the surface, but the brute was too strong and plucked him from his surfboard in less than a second. Under the water, Jason kicked and punched. He tried desperately to pry open the shark's jaws. It thrashed its head from side to side, sending Jason crashing through the water this way and that, entirely at the mercy of the predator. As he was held in the vice-like grip, he could feel the full weight of the powerful bite. The shark resurfaced momentarily, and the water frothed and boiled beside Jason. From the shore, witnesses could see the horror unfolding. The commotion and Jason's cries for help were noticed by others, and those in the water swam for their lives. He was still alive. He was still fighting the battle of his life as he was pulled under the water repeatedly. Each time he resurfaced, gasping for air, and the shark would readjust its grip on him, causing yet more devastating damage as it did so. Finally, the message had got through that the surfer was in trouble, and lifeguards raced to the scene on jet skis. The sound of the loud jet ski motors frightened the shark, and it released its grip on Jason and swam away. With jet skis scrambled to the position, they circled Jason to make sure that the shark was no longer there. Jason had fought a valiant and brave fight. He was left unconscious in the water. He was still alive, but barely. He bobbed on the surface of the water, surrounded in a pool of his own blood, while the first responders arrived on jet skis. They leaned over and pulled him up on their jet skis and powered back toward the beach. It was now a race against time. Jason had done all he could. Now it was up to the medical expertise of those around him. As Jason was pulled ashore, nobody knew if he was going to make it. He had lost a lot of blood. They lay him down and performed life-saving treatment for him, trying to stabilize him before he was rushed to the hospital. Tourniquets were tied around his limbs to staunch the flow of blood, and pressure was applied to the gaping wounds on his torso. When paramedics arrived, he was rushed to the hospital, where he fought for the rest of the day. Sadly, though, Jason lost his battle that evening and succumbed to his horrendous injuries. As news of his death spread, it sent shockwaves through the community. Tributes began pouring in for the much-loved surfer. He was a popular man with many friends in Hawaii and on the mainland. He will be missed by his loved ones, and had left a hole that cannot be filled. His cousins said, whether you had a lifetime with him or 5 minutes, you felt like a changed person because of his beautiful spirit. The beaches were closed for the rest of the weekend for a mile in either direction of the attack site, while jet skis patrolled the area. Jason was the 8th person to be attacked by a shark that year in Hawaii, but only the first fatality. As more and more people take to the seas to enjoy the water sports on offer, tragic encounters like this are only going to become more common. Some even suggest that global warming is leading sharks to search for food closer to shore, posing a greater risk to people.
Todd Michael Endris was a surfer with a larger-than-life character. He was somebody that people instantly fell in love with when they first met him. He lit up every room he walked into. He was the life and soul of the party, but he was known for something else too, something that happened to him when he was 24 years old. On August 28, 2007, he headed out into the surf from Marina State Park Beach, Monterey Bay, California. He joined the other surfers in the water. The waves were breaking at a depth of just 6 feet. The Californian beach is protected. Its huge rugged sand dunes give way to the pristine sands and breakers beyond. It's popular with hang gliders who launch themselves from the top of the dunes and are carried out above the ocean. It's also a popular location for surfers. The surf is reliable and offers some large swells when the conditions are right. Todd loved the ocean. He had his own business servicing aquariums. He was fascinated by marine wildlife. He didn't just love surfing, he loved the environment in which he surfed. He was grateful that he was able to spend his free time in the water amongst friends. On this particular day, after 45 minutes in the water, Todd sat on his board, looking out towards the open sea. He was waiting to catch his next wave, waiting for the next ride. Little did he know it could be his last. From out of nowhere, a 15-foot great white launched up and out of the water. Todd caught a glimpse of it just before it knocked him off his board. He was sent crashing into the ocean, the water engulfing him. It was as though he had been hit by a bus. The force was immense as he was catapulted off his board. He tried to pull himself back onto his board, but the shark was too fast. In a second, it had swum back around and come at the surfer once more. As Todd kicked helplessly at the surface, the shark opened its jaws and clamped them down and around his torso. Todd was sandwiched in the shark's mouth between its serrated teeth and his own surfboard, whilst the upper jaw of the shark tore the skin from Todd's back, described by the man himself as peeling him like a banana. The surfboard protected his underside. Luckily, the shark wasn't able to rip into his stomach and intestines as the surfboard was in the way. In a moment of terror, Todd turned to see the shark's powerful jaws latched around him. He could feel the sharp teeth tearing into his flesh as it held him in a vice-like grip. In another moment, he was dragged beneath the surface. The shark thrashed its head from side to side, shaking Todd violently. He felt the full force of the predator. It let go briefly, but came back a third time. This time it clamped its mouth around Todd's right leg. Holding it firmly in its jaws gave Todd more stability in which to kick it madly with his left leg. As the water bubbled and boiled around Todd, he didn't believe he was going to die. He held on to a strong belief that he would make it, but he didn't know how. He prayed for divine intervention, and his prayers were answered in the most striking of ways. As the shark released its grip on Todd once more, it circled to come back around. But this time, when it came in for the kill, it was blocked by another marine animal. As Todd lay floating at the surface, blood pouring from an enormous gaping wound on his back, a pod of dolphins circled him. In an unexplained moment of true altruism, the dolphins formed a wall around the injured surfer. His prayers had been answered. Some jumped and splashed out of the water. He could see the dolphins surrounding him, their fins breaking through the surface of the water, protecting him, keeping him from harm. His friends rushed to his aid, whilst the dolphins fended off the shark. They pulled Todd towards the shore. He was bleeding profusely. The life was pouring from his limp body. There was no time to waste. He wasn't going to make it. They weren't going to get him to shore in time. Then, a divine power seemed to intervene once more. A huge wave surged behind the surfers and the board on which Todd lay. It pushed them forwards, propelling them toward the shore. In no time, they made it to the shallows and pulled Todd onto dry land. As he slipped in and out of consciousness, the sand around him turned red. He was losing too much blood. The lifeguards at the scene warned Todd's friend, Brian Simpson, that Todd wasn't going to make it. There was just no way anyone could survive such horrendous injuries. When Brian looked down at Todd's injuries, he had to agree with the lifeguards, but he wasn't going to give up on his friend. He worked as an X-ray technician in a trauma unit and was used to seeing gruesome injuries, but this was about as bad as it got. Todd was ashen white by the time he made it to shore. Brian told Todd to slow down his breathing. He needed to remain calm. It was his best chance of slowing his blood loss. The emergency services were called and a medevac helicopter arrived. Todd was airlifted to Santa Clara Medical Center. By the time he arrived, he had lost half of his blood. His blood pressure was dangerously low. It was touch and go whether he would survive the ordeal. Before stitching Todd back up, surgeons apparently had to first figure out what went where, putting the pieces of the jigsaw back together. Todd said that his lungs were visible through the enormous gouge in his back and side. Surgeons closed his wounds with 500 stitches and 200 staples. It took him 6 weeks to regain the blood he had lost. Miraculously, Todd survived the shark attack. He became a local hero and was known locally as Shark Boy. He always had time for people, and whenever people asked him to show him his impressive scar, he would whip off his shirt, revealing a huge bite mark across his back and torso. He wore the scar proudly. He had been lucky to survive such a traumatic ordeal. Despite his narrow escape, Todd returned to the water. He lived to surf another day. But sadly, Todd's life was to hang in the balance once more. Less than 10 years later, 33-year-old Todd crashed his van. He lost control and careened off the road. His black and white pit bull managed to escape from the wreckage. The dog made its way to the main road, barking frantically at passing vehicles, but it would be 10 hours before a biker finally noticed the dog and stopped to investigate. Todd was rushed to the hospital once more. Tragically, after fighting for his life for 11 days in the hospital, he finally succumbed to his injuries and died in September 2016. The memorial that followed his death was attended by more than 100 people. Mourners lined the beach at Monterey Bay. The surfing community joined hands in unison 100 yards from shore, balancing on their surfboards, united as one, remembering one of their own. A minute's applause rang out across the water, a celebration of a life well lived, a final goodbye to their fallen friend, Shark Boy.
It was August 15, 2022, a beautiful sunny day, perfect for the beach. 55-year-old Karen Seitz and her family had traveled from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to spend an unforgettable vacation. They were all more than excited, especially Karen's grandchildren. The family had been planning this trip for over a year. Now, Karen and her husband were finally able to provide their grandchildren the perfect context to make some awesome memories. The kids were over the moon. Karen was too. She had always loved the beach ever since she was a child. There was nothing better than the gentle touch of the sun on her skin, and nothing better than the sound of the waves. August 15th was only the family's second day in Myrtle Beach, but they were already certain everything would be perfect during their stay. How could it not be when they were in one of the most iconic resort cities in the country? Located on the east coast of the United States in Horry County, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach is one of the major tourist centers in the states. Over 20 million tourists choose Myrtle Beach as their vacation destination each year. Maybe it's because of its subtropical climate, or maybe it's because of its miles and miles and miles of beaches. But the city is magnetic. The Grand Strand, an arc of beachland whose primary city is Myrtle Beach, has hundreds of hotels, thousands of restaurants, and tens of golf courses. Myrtle Beach is home to numerous events. It's a city that generally guarantees a good time, equal time relaxation, and more hectic activities. However, not everyone is lucky enough to engage with Myrtle Beach the way they were supposed to. That's what 55-year-old Karen Seitz found out on Monday, August 15, 2022. The day started out beautiful. The sun was up, the sky was blue. The waves of the Atlantic were singing. You know, the proverbial idyllic day at the beach. Karen Seitz and her husband were lying on the beach, carefully supervising their grandchildren. The kids were playing in the sand, happy and at peace. Around afternoon, Karen had an idea. She told her grandchildren they should get in the water, either for a swim or a fun splash. But once they got into the water, the kids' reaction surprised the 55-year-old grandmother. What if there are sharks? What if there are sharks? They kept asking. It was strange. Usually, Karen's grandchildren loved the water and never complained about a quick swim. Karen decided that despite the strangeness of the reaction, her grandchildren's worry was just a normal, childish fear. It was her duty as a grandmother to reassure them. Oh, don't be afraid. It's so rare that anybody ever gets bit by a shark, Karen told the kids. The woman then waited just a few feet away from Brian, her 8-year-old grandson. She was in waist-high water. The water felt nice until it suddenly didn't anymore, and Karen was left fearing for her life. It seemed like her grandchildren's words were more than a childish fear. In retrospect, their words were prophetic. In an instant, a creature jumped out of the water and latched its teeth on Karen's right arm. It was a shark, and a hungry one at that. At first, Karen felt a sharp pain, a pain unlike any other she'd ever felt before. In the first few seconds, the woman had no idea what kind of creature had attacked her. In fact, she thought it was anything but a shark. If she had to guess, she would have said it was a jellyfish currently attached to her arm. But when Karen Seitz looked down, she came face to face with the truth. Her attacker was indeed a shark. As soon as the woman realized what was happening, she acted. It had more to do with her strong survival instinct than with her giving much thought about the right way to proceed. The woman used her left arm to push the creature away, and shockingly, it worked. It was like the shark only wanted to get a small taste, though the bite was anything but small. Brian Seitz, Karen's 8-year-old grandson, watched in shock, only a couple of feet away. He had seen everything. The shark jumping out of the water, latching itself on Brian's grandma's arm, waving its tail, and then finally letting go and falling down into the water. And as if that sight hadn't been scary enough, he was now faced with the sight of a bloody, terrified Karen. The woman and her grandchildren hurried toward the shore. Once they made it to the beach, they were surrounded by people. The racket was deafening. People were yelling, trying to warn others about the danger lurking beneath the waves. Others were still in the water, making their way toward the shore in an erratic manner. It was madness. Karen was still in shock once she got on the beach. She kept saying she didn't want to see her arm. She could feel the sharp pain and the blood trickling down her arm. Luckily, help was seconds away. An ER worker who happened to be at the beach heard the noise and rushed to help Karen, washing the woman's injured arm with bottled water. Minutes later, Karen Seitz was taken to the hospital where she underwent surgery. Hundreds of stitches later, Karen was ready to start her way toward recovery. She had suffered damage to her ring finger as well, but the surgery was a success. She was released from the hospital only a day after the attack. Despite this, doctors couldn't guarantee Karen's arm would ever be the same. The shark had actually somewhat damaged the woman's nerves and tendons as well. All things considered, though, the injuries could have been so much worse. Not to mention, Karen's grandchildren could have been hurt too. And they were, in a sense. 8-year-old Brian Seitz, who had witnessed the whole thing, was left traumatized by the attack and the possibility of losing his grandmother in front of his very eyes. But the Seitz didn't let the attack destroy their vacation. They decided to stay in Myrtle Beach for the week and try to enjoy the city's other attractions. They even visited the beach again, though Brian decided to stick to sunbathing and playing on the sand. "I'll sit on the sand, but I ain't going in the water," the little boy told reporters. There was another shark attack on Monday, August 15th, only about half a mile away from where Karen was bitten. This time, the victim was luckier. The second attack was a more glancing bite to the leg, with no real repercussions. 4 shark attacks were reported in South Carolina a year before, in 2021. Experts advise against swimming in the ocean at dawn or dusk when sharks approach the coast to feed, to leave the water when schools of fish are seen close to the surf, and to avoid areas where people may be using bait to fish. Daniel Abel, a professor of marine science at Coastal Carolina University, said this after Karen Seitz's ordeal. "It's very important that we treat our sharks, our ocean, and our entire planet with more respect than we do now."